bones of a young female, obviously Native American. And he said, by looking at the artifacts, he says, I'll bet that this is the grave of Winona, Bobby's daughter. So they were pretty thrilled about that. And first they put her remains on display at the old city offices that are long gone now, but they decided that a educational venue would be a little bit better, so they took those remains and put them on display at the old Central School, which is where Bailey School is today. And after a year or so, well, the janitor got tired of the kids marking on pencils on the skull and the bones, so he wrapped all that stuff up and threw them out in the trash.
Oh.
So not only did we forcefully remove Bobby's and his people from Hillsdale County, we also desecrated his daughter's grave and put her on display and then threw her into the trash. And according to Edith Ashe, that's a true story. So that's an amazing, amazing revelation. And then there's a story about Bobby's captive, Catherine Cash. All the research I did about the Indians, I kept running across references to Bobby's had some kind of relationship with a white woman. And I thought maybe it was a captive during the massacre of the River Raisin. They call it the Raisin River Massacre. It happened in Monroe during the War of 1812. But it might have even been before that. So that's a whole chapter that I'm sure you'll find fascinating about who this young lady was and what happened to her. And then I've got some poetry that have been written by former Hillsdale County residents. Then I got a chapter about Maytu. He's the forgotten chief. He was kind of a buddy of Bobby's. And then about Nuatrabir. He was also known as Leather Nose. And he lived up around when he was in Hillsdale County, up around Litchfield. And quite often over in Girard Township in Branch County. Interesting story about him is he was kind of a thief, among other things. But he and a partner had gotten a hold of a keg of whiskey, and they had planned on having a big party. Well, his daughter-in-law, apparently a beautiful young woman, didn't want them to do that, didn't want them to get drunk and get in trouble, so she stole the keg of whiskey. And that night, in her wigwam, Leathernose got so mad that he went into her wigwam while she was sleeping and took an axe and chopped her head off from her body, and then they buried her over by Lake Nottawaseppi. And then later on, he got his due because he drowned while trying to cross the Detroit River, trying to get away from the federal troops rounding up the Indians in this area. So, kind of a gruesome story. But I had a classmate and a good friend of mine who has written the foreword to my book, and I thought I'd read what he wrote. And this is from the late Parquet. So how many of you remember Parquets? Well, Park graduated, and there's several of my classmates here. We graduated in 1963 from Hillsdale High School, and Park later went on to Hillsdale College and a long-time news director on WCSR and did sports on WCSR. And so Park, being my buddy, wrote the foreword to my book. And he wrote, in part, Faded Memories is a collection and sampling of major figures, historical moments, and first-person accounts of the frontier settlements in what now is Hillsdale County, Michigan. The hard times, unfamiliar territory, illness, worries about Indians, and about other pioneers' intentions, limited comfort levels, and challenged optimism. But the joys of children, the thrill of establishing new homesteads and communities, and shaping the Midwest development in the 1800s triumphed. The people represented in this book were part of a special time, although they may not have known it at the time. So I appreciate Park doing that for me, and I think it's and our history here is fascinating, and I think it has a lot to do with the hills and the dales. 5 major rivers flow out of this county. No water flows in, and this area was known for millenniums by Native Americans. Our people have been in this area since, well, about 1827, so about 170, 175 years. Native Americans lived right here where we are today for 8,000 years. So there were people who lived their entire lives, and their families lived their entire lives for millenniums, so hundreds of years. And of course they've all gone, but there are more artifacts in the ground than are on display and have been found. Lots and lots of artifacts of the Native Americans. So this area, because of the hills and the dales, and there was plenty of water and plenty of game and food, and the weather was rather moderate, although last winter was brutal. But and there were a couple of winters back then as brutal, and I don't know how those people ever survived, but they did. And so we live in an area that's rich with our history, and I'm pleased to be able to speak for those that can no longer speak for themselves and tell the story of how we came to this land and settled it and how it got to be what it is today. And I'm very proud to, hopefully within a week or two, have Faded Memories, Examination and Profiles of Hillsdale County's Pioneer Period available for purchase. And you can see my wife, she'll take your name and number. So I thank you very much, and if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. Yes, Lori.
Good day to Ferris and Cook. You said that they were buried together.
Yes, side by side.
So they came here when they were like 20 and 21?
They came here as young men and started the whole process, really. They started the whole town.
And they stayed friends their whole lives and never had...
Stayed here their entire lives. They did indeed. And they were responsible for starting the mill, the college, the churches, the buildings downtown. They were fascinated. They both had had some education before they came here and a little bit of money. And their parents had founded the town of Cato, New York. So in that sense, they kind of knew how to do that, how to start a town. And they were very successful in platting the village of Hillsdale initially.
And they stayed friends the whole time?
Pardon?
They stayed friends their whole life? Never had
their entire lives. They were, in fact, Chauncey Washington Ferris's home is that brick building that's on North Street, just west of the Elks Club. There's a brick building there, and that was Chauncey Washington Ferris's home that he built. And the John Potter Cook's was right across the street, in which now is a city parking lot. But then Cook moved up on Hillsdale Street to what has become one of the college fraternity homes. But while they lived side by side, and see, the funny thing about the Cook and Ferris is when they came here, they went back and got a couple of wives, and they were sisters, and they brought them back out here, and they passed away from cholera. There was a terrible cholera epidemic in the Hillsdale in the late 1830s and early 1840s. And so they went back and married two more sisters and brought them out here. And they passed away. So they went back and got some more wives.
So that's why
Maybe they were killing them.
That's right.
Too,
That's correct. They're all buried in a circle.
Yep.
But because they didn't know if they could be somebody's mother and their aunt and their cousin at the same time. And they never knew who was just who, but they got along as a family and enjoyed each other's company for all their lives and until they were elderly and then finally passed away. Got another question? Yes, sir.
You said that one of the people was the first English-speaking person. What was the predominant language prior to that?
Oh, French. Yeah, there were a lot of Frenchmen in Hillsdale County. They were trappers and voyagers, and they came here to trap the beaver and mostly the beaver, because at that time, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, beaver pelts were very valuable. So, in fact, one of them, they had a trading post up north of Coldwater, Marin-Tetz, and then another one by the name of Campow. These were the two main traders in this area, and they had French trappers constantly, visiting their trading post. And Campow actually founded the city of Grand Rapids. He had come from the Detroit area, but they had traveled through Hillsdale County. All the French The first mention of US 12 was actually by a Britisher, and that was in 1762 when Captain Henry Balfour of the 61st British Regiment, actually it was an American regiment in the British Army, they made a trip from Fort Detroit up the lake to Fort Michilimack and posted a group of soldiers, and then down around Lake Michigan to Fort St. Joseph, which is where Niles, Michigan is today, and they posted another group of soldiers, and then they returned to Fort Detroit overland by the trail that at that time that Captain Henry Balfour wrote in his official notes that we took the road from Fort St. Joseph back to Fort Detroit. So even in the 1700s, US 12 was a road, although I'm sure it was kind of bumpy and not the kind of road we think of today. But that had been used by Indians and for hundreds and hundreds of years. But that was the first actual mention of it in writing that I could find. But yeah, there was a lot of French spoken in this area, and then of course the British took over, and then they got defeated by the Americans in the War of 1812, and ever since then it was English. Yes, sir.
Wasn't the Walden Squawfield area there, was that just a summer camp, or was that a...
No, that was a permanent camp. They traveled around quite a bit, but some of them stayed right there all the time. But they would travel around from area to area, and they liked to go up near Gamblersville, which is where Somerset is today. There was a trading post up there, and they liked to go up there and barter for whatever they needed, including whiskey. They all liked whiskey. And then they would travel around to southern parts of the county, wherever the hunting was the best, wherever they could find the best shelter and a place to grow their crops. Now, at the corner of Walder and Squawfield, you know, that's really flat land out there. That part of Hillsdale County turns into tabletop flat and a good farming country, and that's where they grew their maize or their corn. They enjoyed, you know, good soil and pretty good weather to grow their crops. And they grew melons, squash, corn, and of course they had the little St. Joe River right there. Actually, it's the St. Joseph of the Maumee, and you go there today, and there's except for the stone, you'd not know that there was a village there. They had a racetrack that they raced their ponies on. They had probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 dwellings. They made wigwams. You know, they'd take saplings and bend them over, and then and make kind of a dome-shaped thing, and put animal skins or whatever, you know, bark or whatever they could find to make to make a shell. And in the center, they would have a little fireplace and a hole in the top, and there were several of those in that area. Of course, that's all gone. I don't know whether anybody's ever been down there with a metal detector, but it's all privately owned land now, and I would be loath to do that unless I had permission. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Jim.
What do you know about Materville, corner of South Hillsdale and Card Road?
I know that some people we know live there. I've been asked that question, Jim, I don't know how many times, and to be honest with you, I don't know.
I just wondered how big of a community it was at one time.
It wasn't. It was probably, it's like all the other corners. There's a bunch of corners in Hillsdale County. There's Church's Corners.
Yeah.
There's the Fields Corners. There's Materville Corners. There's Bloody Corners. There's a whole bunch of different places named Corners. And that was just one of those little, there's a place up in the northwestern part of the county named Saratoga. Now, who knew that? You know, there's a little road up there named Saratoga, and that used to be some kind of a little gathering place, I guess, the beginnings of a village that never really got going, sort of like Church's Corners. And Church's Corners wasn't named for churches. It was named for an original settler by the last name of Church, and so they called it Church's Corners. It's just like Bird Lake. Bird Lake was named after an original settler, Roland Bird, in Jefferson Township. Sorry, but I didn't know that. I'd sure like to find that out.
I knew somebody that was born there.
Oh, it's somebody that was born there.
Yeah.
The Carlyles live there now. Dave and Rosemary. Any more? Well, I thank you very much for coming. I ran a little bit over the time that I was going to talk, but I appreciate you coming out today. And And we want to thank Greg and all the Vanished Hillsdale